There's a style of video game that flowered in the 80s and 90s with dozens of arcade releases. These are games like Bubble Bobble and Snow Brothers and Tumblepop and many more. In this retrospective video, I'll show what single-screen elimination platformers are all about, including some examples and moments that really shine. I'll highlight what makes the formula tick. We'll also see where this formula breaks down. Finally, we'll go poking around in the attic to see some wonderfully weird games. Welcome to the story of single-screen elimination platformers. Part 1. What are these games? We're talking about a particular kind of video game that I'm calling a single-screen elimination platformer. The action takes place on one screen at a time without scrolling or moving freely between rooms, and your goal in each screen is to eliminate every enemy, then move on to the next screen. You move around and jump, avoiding enemies and their attacks, and you have to find a way to first stun enemies and then finish them off. Different games give you different tools to do this. For instance, in Bubble Bobble, you first capture enemies in bubbles, then pop the bubbles before they break out. In Snow Brothers, you throw snowballs to coat enemies in snow, then kick the big snowball to send it rolling. Nightmare in the Dark is similar, but using spooky fire instead of snow. Tumblepop lets you capture enemies in a magic vacuum cleaner, then launch them back out later. In Zoopapa, you throw your little minions at an enemy, then touch them to finish them off to summon spinning stars that damage everybody nearby. In Don Dokodon, or Joan Mac Returns, you bonk enemies on the head to stun them. It makes sense that cavemen would take the direct approach. Other games have their own methods too, but that gives you the idea. There's usually a combo bonus for defeating several enemies at once. Snow Brothers gives you a big point bonus for defeating all the enemies in one snowball roll. Bubble Bobble rewards you for popping many enemy bubbles at once with special letter bubbles that you can use to spell the word extend for an extra life. These games tend not to emphasize hazards to avoid, like spikes or falling to your death in lava or water or the great unknown below the bottom of the screen. Instead, most of the danger comes from enemies or their attacks touching you. When there are boss battles, you might get an attack that damages the boss directly, but it's also common for you to fight back by using their minions against them. And often in these games you can jump up through ceilings, but can't choose to drop back down through floors. These games are often just called single-screen platformers. I'm using the word elimination in the title just to set them apart from other platformers that do take place on one screen, but have some other goal. We're not talking about platformers focused on getting from point A to point B like Donkey Kong or Meat Boy or the original Celeste, and we're not talking about platformers that focus on gathering items like N++. These games are each their own thing, but as you play them, you'll notice some common threads. Here's a danger level from the Fairyland story in 1985. Here's a danger level from Don Dokodon in 1989. And here's a danger level from Ultra Balloon in 1996. I think of Bubble Bobble, Snow Brothers, and Tumblepop as the three big hits that defined the genre. They inspired sequels and other games working off the same core design ideas through the late 80s and early 90s. Most were made by Japanese developers like Taito, Data East, or Toaplan. By the late 90s, platformers like this were falling out of fashion, but there were several late bloomers. There was Penguin Brothers by a Taiwanese developer, and several games developed in Korea, like Bomb Kick or Dynamite Bomber. And the Neo Geo games Zoopapa and Bang Bang Busters, both originally developed in the early 90s, didn't get released until after the year 2000, which technically makes them late releases too. Part 2. What makes these games work? Single-screen platformers can be a lot of fun. They're easy games to pick up and play, usually just two buttons, to jump and to attack. While they're easy to start, they also have a high skill ceiling. The high skill ceiling comes both because later levels ramp up the challenge, and because you can learn to finish earlier levels with a much higher score, maybe going for extra lives or special items. Individual levels tend to be short, so you can get hooked on trying to clear just one more level, much like you might eat just one more potato chip. And these are great games for co-op play. You and a friend can each work on one part of the screen, and with no scrolling you don't need to worry about a fast player leaving a slow one behind. I mentioned you can play and have fun right away, learn the advanced stuff later, and some of these games have lots of advanced stuff to learn. In Snow Brothers, you might work out a setup for how to eliminate all the enemies at once, and hopefully grab the rain of big bonus items before they quickly vanish. In Don Doko Don, you might learn where to unlock secret rooms, and get the hang of the bonus games you can reliably win extra lives in each secret room. There's even a code you can learn from secret rooms, then input on a later game, to instead play levels 51 through 100, a very different and harder set of rooms, to get the best ending, where you rescue the king. Bubble Bobble features downright esoteric tricks. The actions you take influence which items will drop, so you can do little rituals to influence the future. If you pop lots of water bubbles, you have a chance of grabbing an umbrella later and warping past several levels. Or you can repeatedly fall off the bottom of the screen and wrap around to the top to get a chance at a potion that clears a later level. These games can be easy to make, because once you have the basic game engine and a toolbox of enemies and items, you can easily create a level without needing new art or programming. Someone could design a new level by just filling in a sheet of graph paper. Super Mario Maker is a modern example of easy level creation. Back in the 80s, the natural reference points would be Boulder Dash or Lode Runner. Let me share a couple of examples of fun, creative levels made with simple building blocks. The first example is round 25 from Bubble Bobble. The top of the level spells out the word popcorn, and after playing for a while it's clear why. You can pop fire bubbles, creating flames along these blocks that look like a frying pan, and the monsters bouncing around the screen will hit the fire, popping out of the pan like a piece of popcorn popping. It's cute, and I think it's neat that nobody needed to program in popcorn rules or popcorn logic. This is just a clever way of placing blocks and enemies and items. I do get a kick out of retro games that spell out words or letters using walls that you interact with, like in the original release of Wizardry, where mapping one floor of the dungeon slowly reveals the author's initials. Another example is Round 91 from the Fairyland story. The top of the level spells out the word Dipper, and here we have tiny blocks like stars in the shape of the Little Dipper constellation. That's already kind of a neat theme, but this level is also a tricky one. In order to reach the top of the screen, you have to jump on a dragon to reach a block that forms one of the stars in the constellation. Then you need to make some difficult jumps to the right, and do them quickly before the enemies up top follow along to the right of the screen and gatekeep the top right corner. Finally, you need to use the fact that in the Fairyland story, if there's exactly one enemy left and you wait, that last enemy will vanish and the level will end. So you need to leave just one of the two dragons alive at the bottom of the screen, not both, or you'll be trapped at the top until a little Time's Up devil comes to kill you. Again, this level required no special rules or logic or new parts, just clever placement on the grid. It's elegant to see simple building blocks mixed into a nice variety of levels. Tumblepop even uses variations on a theme for its soundtrack. In the US, you hear a bit of the national anthem, then a jaunty tune. Then in Brazil, you hear a different version of that tune. Egypt has its own twangy version of that same melody. And then France has a version of that tune in 3/4 time. I love it when games do this. So I've said these games are fun for players and good projects for the game's creators. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a third point to the triangle, the arcade operator, who bought the game and put it out on the floor, hoping that players would take the bait and put lots and lots of coins in it. And these games were often a good bet for arcade operators as well. They're easy to pick up games, they often feature co-op play for two people putting in coins at once, and they tend to be long games, where players won't see the whole game until they've played for quite a while. And often these had a continue feature, so that players eager to see the ending could credit feed through. So we've got a formula that works pretty well for the player, the game's authors, and for the arcade operator. To see what makes that formula really shine, I think it's interesting to contrast the Fairyland story to Bubble Bobble to see how Taito polished that single-screen platformer formula. These are two similar games from the same publisher, released in consecutive years. Both revolve around defeating every enemy on the screen, both have cute cartoony graphics, both are 100 rounds long, both have some stages where falling off the bottom of the screen wraps you around to the top. Why was Bubble Bobble a mega hit, spawning sequels and ported to every console and home computer around, when the Fairyland story fell into relative obscurity? It's hard to be sure, but I think there's a few reasons. One is that Bubble Bobble has a more satisfying attack. Popping bubbles is more dramatic than dropping or repeatedly zapping a cupcake. Bubble Bobble also pours on the positive feedback, with tons of bonus items, including giant food items. Ridiculously huge food bonus items caught on in a lot of later games. There's also a more explicit challenge to reach round 100. Here in the Attract mode, the game practically dares you to reach the end, tempting you to practice or just credit feed so that you can get deeper into the game. And I think the biggest factor of all, though, is that Bubble Bobble offers two-player simultaneous play. In the Fairyland story, you and a friend can each put in a coin and take turns each time you lose a life, but Bubble Bobble has the jolly cooperation chaos of both of you playing at the same time. If you're playing alone, the other dinosaur even shows up to wave an insert coin sign around. And there's so much emphasis on playing together in Bubble Bobble that you can't get the good ending of the game, one that talks about the magic of love and friendship, without Bub and Bob both being there. If just one player pops super drunk, you're sent back to level 80. Good for high score attempts, frustrating if you want closure. Part 3. What makes these games not work? One downside of single-screen elimination platformers is that a lot of levels made from the same simple ingredients can feel repetitive. It's nice that the levels are easy to make, the simplicity can be elegant, but maybe they're so easy to make that people can get a little carried away and pad things out to make the game take a little more time and bring in a little more money. Several of these games use the old padding trick of reusing bosses for a gauntlet of refight battles at the end. Sometimes these games can feel like 15 minutes of great ideas and fun stretch across 45 minutes of playtime. Having 100 levels in a game like Bubble Bobble or Angband is an impressive round number, but might be overkill. A little arcade game padding is nothing compared to the shameless exploitative tricks that free-to-play games employ to manipulate players these days, but these are still games that arguably overstay their welcome. Getting the Bubble Bobble music stuck in your head after hearing the same tune nonstop for half an hour is not entirely pleasant. Another oddity of these games is the shape of the difficulty curve. If you think of a typical video game, you expect the difficulty level to start low and then rise over time, building to peaks at boss battles or other high-stakes, high-drama points. For a linear platformer, you might expect something along the lines of this sawtooth as the skeleton for your difficulty curve. But the difficulty curve on an elimination platformer is weird. Typically, you start out with maximum risk and danger with all the enemies on the screen, which drops down to minimum challenge and risk when you get down to the last one or two enemies. Just as in a collectathon like Banjo-Kazooie, people can get bored of finding the last dingus and doohickey, people can get bored hunting down the last critter after the sense of danger is gone. This difficulty curve weirdness is especially true for games like Tumblepop and Snow Brothers, where one defeated enemy can in turn defeat other enemies, causing things to both literally and figuratively snowball. If you use your iframes at the start of the level to take the high ground and roll a snowball in a good direction, you can very quickly change the level from a crowded and dangerous one into a routine mopping up exercise. And that trend of high to low difficulty is occasionally subverted with enemy spawners, but it's a common pattern. It's also something you see in some other kinds of games like The Binding of Isaac, where you have to eliminate the enemies in each room to proceed, so most rooms start out at their most dangerous, then get easier. So one could complain these games tend to be long and have a weird difficulty curve. One final reason I think these games fell out of favor is that they are limited. When I say that a game is a single-screen platformer, I'm defining it in terms of what the game doesn't do. It doesn't scroll. Scrolling allows for a lot of interesting platforming parkour and gives a feeling of progression. Scrolling the screen was hard to do on very early video game hardware, and once it became an easy feature to add, non-scrolling games started to look old-fashioned. Even outside of platformers, fixed shooters, meaning non-scrolling shmups like Space Invaders, fell out of favor in the late 80s or so, and by 1990 just a few exceptions, like Space Bomber, would choose not to include any scrolling. Now, let's get weird. Part 4. Bootlegs and Jank. I have a soft spot for single-screen platformers, but I have to admit they were a magnet for low-budget or even crooked companies. Some would just sell a bootleg version of another company's PCB, or in other cases they took someone else's game, made a ROM hack that modified the game just enough to look like a new game, and sold that. Snow Brothers was ripped off in interesting ways. It was packaged as Winter Bobble, and as just Snow in Puzzle King with a new soundtrack. Snow Brothers also saw not one but 2 ROM hacks that remixed the game with a sports theme. Come Back Toto is a ROM hack of Snow Brothers that gives you several attacks that use sports balls, and it reskins the enemies as rampaging football players and baseball players and such. The boss music is a very lethargic version of the Go Go Power Rangers song. It has inexplicable design choices like stunned enemies turning into jack-o'-lantern people instead of snowballs. Then the so-called Snow Brothers 3 reworks Snow Brothers with a World Cup soccer theme and a hodgepodge of stolen art. It does add the ability to curve your shots upward, which is a neat touch, but it also has a bug where certain enemies are completely invisible. This turns the 4th boss, which is already a difficulty spike, into an unfair and unfun fight. Tumblepop was a very popular game. It's pretty good, even if they did misspell speed on the instruction screen. Tumblepop was extensively ripped off or copied. One ROM hack, Jumping Pop, just changes the stage background to anime characters. Pang Pang is a more extensive update, where instead of vacuuming enemies up, you shoot at them to capture them in bubbles. It's a baffling mess which loops the tune "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" incessantly, and it changes the stage clear logo to the text "How Ridiculous." Be warned that the reward for finishing each world of Pang Pang is a pixelated scan of a photograph of a naked woman. The game is tacky. My favorite of the Tumblepop ROM hacks is Jump Kids. Here you play a baby on a rampage fighting monsters. It's a cursed game with artwork that's all the more unsettling because the main character is just a baby. I have a bit of a sweet tooth for jank, and I got a 1 credit clear on Jump Kids, but I can't in good conscience recommend it. There's other games on Tumblepop hardware like Magic Purple and Metal Saber that modify the game a lot and further blur the line between just a remix and an original game. Magic Purple does deserve credit for some interesting character designs like this angry cheeseburger with a mohawk. Bubble Bobble inspired some knockoffs like Super Bubble 2003 and Ultra Balloon. Ultra Balloon is a glorious train wreck, which can be interesting in the same way as watching a cheesy movie on Mystery Science Theater 3000. One of the few good things I can say about Ultra Balloon is that it does grant you the power to fart. I mean, if we don't deign to laugh at farts, our lives will contain less laughter, but still contain the same amount of farts. Ultra Balloon includes a lot of stolen art, especially from Susumu Matsushita, famous for video game art on the Japanese video game magazine Famitsu. The soundtrack features music you may recognize from elsewhere. Reworking a famous tune is nothing to be ashamed of. The Parodius series has a delightful soundtrack that reimagines classics with skill and panache. But listen to this dismal version of the Phantom of the Opera's theme. The game balance of Ultra Balloon is a mess, where penguin-seeking missiles and harsh time limits make the later stages frustrating, even to a single-screen platformer fan like me. I'll name and shame one other single-screen platformer with lazy level design and stolen assets. Dark Tower features music and sprites stolen from other, better arcade games, like Double Dragon and Black Tiger. The author, Kyle Hodgetts, is a colorful figure who was involved in several sketchy arcade games, and later was accused of being involved in other scams. After the TV program A Current Affair did a story called Kyle the Con, he sued them for $2.5 billion. Spoiler alert, he didn't win. He's now promoting a bogus heart disease medication delivered via enema, and both the FDA and Australian regulators are going after him for false medical advertising. And that's a rabbit hole I didn't expect to go down while researching some fun little arcade games. Turning now to a much happier note, Bubble Bobble has a fan-made ROM hack, Lost Cave, that came out in 2012. It's the same arcade Bubble Bobble, but all 100 levels are reworked, bringing in levels that first appeared in some of the many console ports. It's clearly a labor of love and a breath of fresh air after looking at some ROM hacks that were shameless and in some cases illegal cash grabs. Part 5. The End. Now you know how single-screen elimination platformers work. You've seen them at their best and at their worst. If you're curious to check these games out, I'll throw out a few recommendations. Bubble Symphony is worth a try. It's a fun, very polished take on the formula. It's a sequel to Bubble Bobble that adds branching paths and more boss battles. Snow Brothers 2, with new elves, is another fun one despite its off-putting character select screen. It's also not overly long, easily finished in under 20 minutes, and it even throws in a scrolling section, maybe just to show they can. Joe and Mac Returns is a solid game. Data East had a kind of trilogy of single-screen platformers, starting with Tumblepop, then Diet Go-Go, and finally Joe and Mac Returns. It also continues the trend of having giant food drop from the sky in celebration. And finally, Zupapa is a very fun take on the formula, featuring terrific background art and a high-energy techno soundtrack. And that wraps things up. Thank you for joining me on this retrospective of arcade single-screen elimination platformers.